This Necromancer build is for getting to World Tier 3 and melting packs of enemies by locking them into Bone Prism and Bone Spearing them to death. Are you ready? Let's go! Let me know what class you'd like me to do next in the comments down below. So this is really an extension of my Bone Breaker leveling guide, which if you are still in the process of hitting level 50, go and watch that video. It'll give you sort of a leveling version of this. But I've made some tweaks since sort of hitting level 50 in the end game. And the main tweak is that I've dropped the Iron Golem for Corpse Tendrils because this combos perfectly with Bone Prison. Now, this really allows you to like pull enemies in, it stuns them, and you can then trap them inside with Bone Prison. You can really get a lot of damage off and just sort of keeping them nice and clumped together, which is perfect for Bone Spear, our mage damage dealer, which only really hits sort of in that line except for the ricochet. When it comes back, it does spread out a little bit, but the closer you can get enemies in together, the more you can hit, the better it'll do. I also dropped Iron Maiden for Blood Mist. Now, I actually did this during the campaign, like after I made that video, because I wanted more survivability, especially against some of like the later story bosses, especially like Lilith. Like you sort of get stunned a lot in some sort of areas, and really the only way out of that, other than just like having infinite dodge charges, is with Blood Mist. So I've been running it for those encounters, and that's really helpful into like World Tier 3, and even when you're doing the Capstone dungeon, just to have a bit of like a get out of jail free card, in that if you screw up your positioning or you get stunned, you can sort of get out of that very easily. And that's the only reason why that like I run Blood Mist. But if you want to change it to Iron Maiden or something else, you absolutely can do so. So when you're looking at your skills in the basic skill, we're running Bone Splinters here, and you don't really need to upgrade it, as we're mostly just using it to generate essence, which is a critical part of this build. Is that if you don't have enough essence, you can't cast the main damage dealer, being Bone Spear. So any way that you can generate that is really important. So that's why we haven't really upgraded it. But into the core skills, you want to grab Unliving Energy and Imperfectly Balanced and maximize those, and also level out Bone Spear all the way to 5, plus grabbing Enhanced and Paranormal. Now, Hued Flesh is definitely important. Like I would definitely like to put more points into this, but what it does is it generates a corpse on the ground at the target location. It's doubled for bosses. It's a great way to get corpses so you can actually consume them when there isn't actually a target to kill. But the way that I'm running this, it's not too much of an issue. It's mostly just for bosses, so that's why I'm running that. So then I do have a way to trigger like Corpse Tendrils for bosses. Into the next line, we're running Blood Mist here, which you don't need to upgrade. It's really just for the immune effect and the way that you can get out of things. So that's why it's just 1. And Bone Prism, you definitely want to maximize this and level that out to 5 to 5, enhance it, and kick up a Dreadful so you can get that Fortify from that. You don't really need to worry about Vulnerable as the Ghastly Bone Prism, because you're going to have Vulnerable on targets anyway, so it's not a big deal. But then grab Grim Harvest, level that out, so when you consume a corpse, you generate essence as well as fueled by death. So you deal increased damage for 6 seconds after you have consumed a corpse. So because we're consuming a corpse with Corpse Tendril, you'll generate that essence, you'll get that damage increase, and then you can dump all of your essence with Bone Spear into those targets that you've trapped with Bone Prism. Picking up nothing in the curse line and then moving down into the next line. Here we've got Corpse Tendril, which we did discuss. Now you do want to level this out and grab Plagued, but for the most part, you don't have to worry too much. And going down into the bone skills here, you really want to grab these passives because they're critical to your overall success with your bone skills. So make sure you grab all 4 of these. Down into the next, into your ultimate, we're running Bone Storm. So Bone Storm will deal damage to all the enemies around you. It also increases your damage reduction and your critical hit chance. The critical hit chance is super important for this build, plus the overall damage reduction. It's a great skill that if you just need that little bit of extra juice, like if you've got a lot of enemies around you. And then we're definitely picking up both of the skills here, which we did discuss. And then Stand Alone is important, as well as Memento Mori, because we're sacrificing all of our minions here. So grabbing that extra 60% sacrifice bonus is important. And then into your key passive, Ossified Essence, is what we're picking up here for bone skills. Increased damage for each point of essence you have above 50 upon cast. For class specialization, we are sacrificing our warriors to grab extra critical strike chance. And if you do struggle with survivability, like say if you're trying to do the Capstone dungeon or something, you can go defenders and grab that 15% non-physical resistance. Into mages here, we are sacrificing the shadow mages for increase to our maximum essence. You could also grab the increased damage to vulnerable enemies, because most of the enemies are vulnerable, but because we're really trying to dump as much energy into Bone Spear, then the maximum essence is sort of what's more important here. And into the Golems line, we're just grabbing the Iron Golem here to deal 30% increased critical strike damage over the actual Golem, because that is the core part of this build. I don't want to go too deep into the Paragon board, as we're sort of just talking about World Tier 3 here. I'll probably do like a further down the line, like perfectly min-maxed or with all the legendaries build down the line later. But when you're sort of looking at the Paragon board, you want to go to the right here and grab all the intelligence and damage nodes, because that's the core sort of focus of this build. And once you hit that first glyph slot, maybe Sacrificial is a good option here to increase the effectiveness of the magic nodes sort of nearby. Though I am a bit of a fan of Roll glyph, because when you can put control in there as well, you get an extra damage to targets that are crowd controlled, which is what we're crowd controlling targets by our Corpse Tendril. So there's a couple of sort of solid options here that you can go towards, but you really don't have to worry too much about it sort of in those early stages. Like as long as you're following getting something from the different lines, like whether that be intelligence or damage, like there's definitely always something valuable in the Paragon board, regardless of what you're sort of, you know, perfectly min-maxing it. So the rotation for this build really comes down to a couple of things. So as soon as you start fight, you want to start with Bone Spear until you get a corpse. Then you want a Corpse Tendril, that corpse to suck all the enemies in. Bone Prison that area, and then spam it with Bone Spear. And then you've got Bone Storm to use if you need a little bit of extra damage or resistance. And then you've got Blood Mist to use if you do get stuck and you need a way to get out. And, you know, it also is helpful if, say, you lock yourself inside your Bone Prison, you can use Blood Mist to sort of get out of that as well. The main thing to really worry about in combat is your essence and that essence generation. So you want to be using Bone Spear as much as possible. So the uptime that you can get on your Bone Spear is like the most critical thing. Now this is achievable via like different legendaries and certain things in your gear, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but it's sort of the key thing to think about as you're progressing this build into further into the end game, into World Tier 3, is really thinking about that essence generation and where you're getting that from, whether it be regenning from different legendaries or even just increasing your overall max essence. For your gear, there's really 2 critical legendaries, and then the rest is sort of like what you get, as in the best that you can find, and then one like key thing that you need to think about. So the first critical one that you absolutely have to have is the splintering aspect. So Bone Spear's primary attack makes enemies hit beyond the first vulnerable for 1.5 seconds, and Bone Shards for Bone Spear deal X amount of extra damage to vulnerable targets and pierce them. Now, you really want to grab this and put this in a 2-handed weapon, because when it's in a 2-handed weapon, it will get 100% extra increase, and obviously ones that drop from enemies often have a high percentages as well. So if you get one that is available to put into a 2-handed weapon, definitely do that. The second major aspect you need to get is the aspect of Grasping Veins. You gain X amount of increased critical strike chance for 6 seconds after you cast Corpse Tendrils, and X amount of critical strike damage. So because that's like your big setup ability with Corpse Tendril to suck all the enemies in, that critical hit chance and critical hit damage is really important for this build, and you want to put that into any sort of a slot that you can put that in. Otherwise, the last thing that you really need to think about is essence generation. How are you going to generate essence quickly so that you can spam Bone Spear? Now, this is done by a couple of ways. There's a couple of different aspects that you could run. Like at the moment, I'm running critical strikes with Bone Skills increase essence generation. I actually run the Mother's Embrace ring for a fair amount of time that you get just for completing the story, but there are plenty of different rings that you can run, and it doesn't even have to be a ring, right? It's just ways that you can generate it. The resource aspect of Umbral is another one, so you generate resource for every crowd controlled enemy. So because we crowd control enemies with Corpse Tendril, it's really just thinking about how you're going to do that. And then afterwards, you really want to consider either balancing between your other legendaries with defensive legendaries, or other things that might help your build, say buffing Bone Storm with barriers, or even buffing your Bone Prison, as certain ways that you can do that. Now, a really good headpiece is the one that I'm running here, but because it's a sacred, unique, like legendary, can't really tell you that, you know, just go out and get this. It's just a random drop, but it's exceptional for this build because of the way that it buffs Bone Spear even further than the way that we're already doing this. So if you absolutely get this helmet, definitely run it. But otherwise, that's the most critical part of the legendaries. For your gems, you absolutely want to put the emeralds into your weapon so that you increase your critical strike damage against vulnerable enemies. In armor, probably rubies is okay just for maximum life, and then into your jewelry, probably skulls for armor is what I would say. Some quick necromancer tips when you're looking at different gear gear and like what to actually put on, you really want to have intelligence in any piece of gear that you actually equip. Looking at things like bone skill damage or critical hit strike or critical hit damage, those sort of things are also very important to have. Dexterity isn't like the worst stat to see on gear, but you definitely want to have intelligence on like basically every piece of gear that you do have. I would often save up Corpse Tendril and Bone Prison together so you can get like that big combo off, especially in big packs of enemies. But every time you use Corpse Tendrils, you will get some of your essence back. So if say you're, fighting a boss or something, you don't necessarily need to wait for those sort of combos. If you're just trying to get as many Bone Spears off as possible, then you can pop that as soon as the cooldown does come up. And that is my Necromancer level 50 build. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below and what class you'd like me to do next. Thanks guys for watching this video till the end. Thank you to our members for supporting the channel. My name is Norza and I hope you have a great day.